General Donald Peterson stood on the veranda of his modest home, his military uniform exchanged for a simple shirt and slacks. For once, he allowed himself to relax. His wife, Lyra, hummed a tune as she set the table inside, while their two children, Tessa and Jonah, chased each other through the yard. Donald's comms implant pinged softly, a reminder of the ever-present demands of his role in humanity's defense. He ignored it for now, savoring the rare peace. In the depths of his heart, he knew such moments were fleeting. His battles against the Gorth Empire had made him a hero, but they had also marked him as a target. "Breakfast is ready," Lyra called, her voice warm and melodic. Donald smiled as he walked inside, ruffling Jonah's hair on the way. Moments later, the world shattered. The first blast came from the east, a deafening roar that shook the ground and sent plates clattering to the floor. Donald's instincts kicked in before his mind could process. Grabbing Jonah and pulling Tessa close, he barked orders to Lyra. "Get to the shelter. Now!" Through the window, he saw the unmistakable silhouette of Gorth warships descending through the atmosphere, their sleek forms slicing through the sky like daggers. Bright plasma bolts rained down, engulfing the colony in chaos. Lyra hesitated, her face pale. "Donald, what's happening?" "Go!" he roared, shoving her toward the hidden hatch in the floor. His heart pounded as the family scrambled into the underground bunker, his military mind racing to assess the situation. But the Gorth had planned this too well. A second strike hit just as Donald was about to descend, the force of the explosion flinging him backward. Heat and debris engulfed the house, the ground beneath him splitting apart. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and when he clawed his way to the edge of the crater, the bunker was gone. For a moment, the world stood still. Donald's breath caught in his chest, his knees buckling. The faces of his family flashed before his eyes. Lyra's gentle smile, Tessa's laughter, Jonah's boundless curiosity. A guttural cry erupted from his throat, raw and primal, as he collapsed to the ground. Hours later, amid the smoldering ruins of the colony, rescue ships arrived. Donald, barely conscious, was pulled aboard by Terran soldiers. He was no longer the revered general. He was a broken man. The war room aboard the flagship Eternal Resolve buzzed with tension. Holograms of the Gorth fleet flickered above the central table, surrounded by stern-faced officers. General Peterson, now clad in his military regalia, sat silently at the head. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. Admiral Rhea Alcott cleared her throat. The attack on New Aurora Colony wasn't random. The Gorth targeted it because they knew it was your home, General. This was personal. Donald's voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. "And what is command prepared to do about it?" A younger officer spoke up hesitantly. "Retaliation is complicated. The Gorth Empire controls." "Enough!" Donald snapped, his gaze icy. "They butchered my family. They destroyed innocent lives. And you're telling me retaliation is complicated?" Admiral Alcott raised a hand to calm him. "General, we're not dismissing your loss. But a full-scale assault on the Gorth Empire could escalate into a war we're not prepared to win. We need precision, not brute force." Another officer, clad in the black uniform of the Covert Ops Division, stepped forward. "Which is why we propose an alternative." All eyes turned to him as he activated a new hologram. The image of the Gorth royal family appeared. Emperor Zalrath, a towering figure with cruel eyes, and his closest kin, the architects of the Empire's brutal policies. "Remove the head," the operative said coldly, "and the body dies. Without the royal family, the Gorth Empire will collapse into infighting." Donald stared at the hologram, his fists tightening. "And who do you propose to send?" The operative smirked. "We already have our team, Mira and Kyle." The room fell silent. Even Donald, despite his grief and rage, hesitated at the mention of their names. Mira and Kyle were legends and nightmares. An assassin duo who had carried out missions so audacious and bloody that their existence was almost mythical. The briefing door slid open and they entered. Mira, tall and lean, moved with the grace of a predator. Her dark eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculating. Kyle followed, his build stockier but no less lethal, his every step deliberate. "General Peterson," Mira said with a faint, mocking smile. "It's an honor. We've heard so much about you." Donald rose to his feet, his expression stony. "This isn't a game. You eliminate the Gorth royal family, or you won't come back." Kyle chuckled, his voice deep and gravelly. "We always come back, General. Question is, can you handle what we'll leave behind?" Admiral Alcott intervened before the tension could escalate. "You have your orders. The assassins will infiltrate Gorth Prime and neutralize the targets. General, your role is to oversee and provide whatever support they need." Donald's gaze lingered on Mira and Kyle. "You'll get no mercy from me if you fail." Mira smirked, unfazed. "Good. Mercy is overrated." After the briefing, Donald stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars that once inspired on now felt cold and distant. His mind replayed the horrors of the attack, the faces of his family haunting him. The door hissed open, and Admiral Alcott stepped inside. "Donald," she said softly, "I know this is personal, but we can't let grief blind us. Mira and Kyle are the best chance we have to end this war without plunging the galaxy into chaos." Donald didn't turn. "And what happens after? If we become the monsters we're fighting, is that a victory worth having?" Alcott sighed. "Sometimes there are no clean victories, only survival." Donald closed his eyes, his shoulders heavy with the weight of loss and responsibility. "Then they'd better succeed. Because if they don't, I'll finish the job myself." In the void of space, the eternal resolve surged toward its destination, carrying with it vengeance, hope, and a plan that could reshape the galaxy. The Gorth Prime skyline loomed ahead, a sprawling web of spires and glowing pathways that pulsed with alien energy. From orbit, the planet was a marvel of advanced technology and architectural genius. Up close, it was a fortress. Every street, every building bristled with surveillance systems and armed patrols, each designed to repel even the most daring of intrusions. Mira adjusted the control interface of their cloak drop pod, her gloved fingers dancing over the holographic console. Beside her, Kyle checked his weapons, their edges sharp enough to cut through even the reinforced exoskeletons of the Gorth elite guards. Neither spoke much, they didn't need to. Years of working together had forged a silent understanding between them. As the pod slipped undetected into the planet's atmosphere, Mira glanced at Kyle. "You ready for this?" Kyle smirked without looking up. "I'm always ready. The question is, are they ready for us?" The pod landed softly in the shadow of a towering industrial complex. They stepped out into the dim, acrid air, their forms vanishing into the darkness as they activated their stealth suits. Mira led the way, her movements precise and deliberate. Kyle followed, his heavier steps muted by the suit's dampeners. Their entry point was an abandoned utility shaft, mapped out during weeks of reconnaissance. Every detail of the mission had been planned to perfection, but both new plans only lasted until the first encounter with the enemy. Inside the shaft, Mira activated a compact scanner, its soft hum echoing in the confined space. "Clear," she whispered. They ascended in silence, climbing rung after rung until they reached an access hatch. Mira paused, listening for any sound beyond the hatch. When none came, she twisted the lock and pushed it open just enough to peek through. Above them stretched a maintenance corridor, dimly lit and seemingly deserted. Kyle slipped through first, his broad frame somehow making no sound as he landed. Mira followed, her scanner already sweeping for hidden traps or alarms. The corridor led them into the heart of the industrial sector, where alien workers moved like cogs in a machine, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic implants to better serve their empire. "Stay low," Mira murmured, leading Kyle through a series of narrow alleys. The Gorth were efficient, but their reliance on routine made them predictable. Mira exploited this, weaving through blind spots and timing their movements to avoid detection. Their first obstacle came in the form of a security drone, its spindly frame hovering in place as its optical sensors scanned the area. Mira signaled to Kyle, who nodded and drew a compact EMP grenade from his belt. With practiced precision, he tossed it into the drone's path. The device pulsed once, and the drone collapsed to the ground with a lifeless clatter. "That was the easy part," Kyle muttered. Mira allowed herself a faint smile. "Don't get cocky." As they moved closer to the royal district, the atmosphere grew heavier, both literally and figuratively. The air here was thick with chemical additives meant to sustain the Gorth elite, whose physiology had evolved beyond the needs of their laboring lower classes. Myra's suit filtered out the toxins, but the oppressive weight of the environment was harder to shake. Their next challenge was a checkpoint, manned by a squad of Gorth soldiers. The aliens were taller and more muscular than humans, their reptilian features made even more menacing by the glint of bioenhancements. Mira and Kyle crouched behind a supply crate, assessing the situation. "For guards," Kyle whispered. "Too many for a straight fight." Mira studied the scene, her mind working through possibilities. "We don't need to fight. We just need a distraction." She pulled a small device from her pack and set it to emit a high-frequency sound that only Gorth auditory sensors could detect. She tossed it into a nearby vent, and seconds later, the guards stiffened, their movements becoming erratic as they tried to locate the source of the disturbance. While the guards were distracted, Mira and Kyle slipped through the checkpoint, their forms mere shadows in the chaos. Beyond the checkpoint, the architecture shifted. The utilitarian design of the industrial zone gave way to opulence. The royal district was a labyrinth of polished obsidian and glowing runes, each structure a monument to Gorth's superiority. The palace itself rose at the center, its spires reaching into the heavens like claws. Mira paused, taking in the sight. "This is it." Kyle checked his weapons again, his expression grim. "I hope their walls are as fragile as their egos." The final approach required scaling a service tower that overlooked the palace's outer walls. The climb was treacherous, the wind whipping around them as they ascended. Myra's fingers ached as she gripped the cold metal rungs, but she pushed the discomfort aside. Kyle, as always, climbed with a calm that bordered on indifference. At the top, they found a vantage point that gave them a clear view of the palace grounds. Guards patrolled in tight formations, their movements synchronized like a dance. Mira pulled out a high-powered scope and began marking their patterns. "Shift changes every 20 minutes, she observed. "We'll have a small window to get inside." Kyle nodded, and once we're in, Mira didn't answer immediately. She was focused on the palace itself, her mind racing through possible entry points. Finally, she said, "We adapt." Kyle chuckled softly. "That's what I like about you. Always so optimistic." The wait felt longer than it was. When the next shift change occurred, Mira and Kyle descended the tower and made their move. They slipped through the outer defenses, their stealth suits rendering them invisible to both sensors and the naked eye. Inside the palace walls, they moved like ghosts, avoiding contact whenever possible. But the deeper they went, the tighter the security became. In one corridor, they were forced to take out a pair of guards silently, their blades cutting through alien flesh with ruthless efficiency. Mira wiped her knife clean, her expression unreadable. They finally reached a chamber that overlooked the throne room. From their hidden vantage point, they saw Emperor Zalrath himself, flanked by his council of advisors. The Gorth ruler was even more imposing in person, his scaled body adorned with ceremonial armor that gleamed in the unnatural light. Myra's hand tightened around her rifle as she lined up the shot. Kyle watched her, his own weapon at the ready. "On your mark," he whispered. Myra's finger hovered over the trigger, her heartbeat steady. But as she aimed, she noticed something. a strange device near the throne, pulsing with energy. It was unlike any Gora technology she had seen before, and its presence sent a chill down her spine. "What is that?" Kyle asked, following her gaze. Mira shook her head, her grip on the rifle faltering. For the first time in the mission, doubt crept into her mind. "We need to find out," she said quietly. Kyle frowned. "We don't have time for this." But Mira didn't lower her weapon. The mission was clear, yet the presence of that device raised questions she couldn't ignore. Was there more to the Gorda's actions than they had been led to believe? Before Kyle could argue further, footsteps echoed down the corridor behind them. They exchanged a glance, their silent communication clear. "Later," Mira whispered, pulling back from the vantage point. "We'll deal with it later." As they melted into the shadows, the tension between duty and curiosity simmered. The Emperor's death was their priority, but the mysteries of Gorath Prime were far from solved. The silence within the heart of the Gorath Palace was absolute, broken only by the occasional hum of security drones sweeping the corridors. Mira and Kyle moved in perfect synchrony, their footsteps soundless, their breathing controlled. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders, but they carried it with the ease of those who had faced death too often to fear it. Ahead, the corridor opened into the vast expanse of the throne room. Emperor Zalrath stood at the center, an imposing figure draped in ceremonial armor that radiated power. The intricate etchings on his armor glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the energy of the strange device near the throne. His council flanked him, their alien faces sharp with intelligence and cruelty. They were discussing plans for the next strike, their guttural language harsh and grating. Mira and Kyle crouched in the shadows of an upper alcove, observing. Myra's gaze locked onto the Emperor. Her rifle was already assembled, the barrel resting against the ledge. The shot was perfect, no obstructions, no movement to calculate. A single squeeze of the trigger, and the Gorath Empire would descend into chaos. But her attention kept drifting to the device near the throne. Its pulsating energy was hypnotic, its purpose a mystery, her instincts, honed by years of surviving impossible missions, screamed that this was important. "Take the shot," Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible. She adjusted her aim, her breathing steady. Yet hesitation gnawed at her. Something about the device felt wrong, as though it was watching them, aware of their presence. "Mira," Kyle urged, his tone sharper now. "This isn't the time for second-guessing." Her finger tightened on the trigger. The moment stretched, her focus narrowing to the crosshairs on Zalrath's chest. She exhaled, steadying herself, and then the device flared, its glow intensifying into a blinding burst of light. A deafening hum filled the air, and the palace trembled. Myra's shot went wide, the energy pulse throwing off her aim. The Emperor and his council reacted instantly, their guards flooding the throne room in a blur of movement. "Move!" Kyle barked, yanking her back as a hail of plasma fire erupted from below. The alcove became a death trap, the walls disintegrating under the onslaught. Mira and Kyle darted down a side passage, their stealth suits struggling to recalibrate against the energy interference from the device. "What was that thing?" Kyle growled as they sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors. "I don't know," Mira replied, her voice tight. "But it's not just a weapon. It's something bigger." Kyle shot her a sidelong glance, frustration evident. "Bigger than the Emperor's head on a platter? Because we just lost our chance." The palace erupted into chaos, alarms blaring as security forces converged on their last known position. Mira and Kyle darted through shadowed halls, evading detection with a mix of luck and skill. Myra's mind raced, piecing together fragments of intel and observation. The Emperor's calm under fire, the presence of the device, the sudden energy surge. It all pointed to something beyond the scope of their mission. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a squad of Gorath guards. Kyle acted instantly, his blade flashing as he engaged the nearest soldier. Mira followed suit, her movements fluid and deadly. The fight was quick but brutal, their training and precision outmatching the guards' brute strength. When the last guard fell, Mira knelt to inspect one of their helmets. A faint residue of the same energy that had emanated from the device clung to the metal. "This isn't just about politics," she said, more to herself than to Kyle. "They're hiding something." Kyle wiped blood from his blade, his expression grim. "We don't have time for mysteries, Mira. The mission just changed," she interrupted, her voice firm. "If we don't figure out what that device is, killing the Emperor might not matter." Kyle glared at her, his jaw tightening. "You're letting your gut override orders, and you're letting orders blind you to the bigger picture," she shot back. For a moment, the tension between them crackled, but the sound of approaching footsteps forced them back into motion. They ducked into a maintenance shaft, the narrow space forcing them to move single file. As they climbed deeper into the palace's underbelly, Mira activated her scanner, searching for the device's energy signature. It pulsed faintly, leading them down a network of tunnels until they emerged in a chamber unlike anything they had encountered before. The room was massive, its walls lined with conduits that pulsed with the same energy as the device. At its center stood a massive crystalline structure, suspended in a containment field. The energy radiating from it was overwhelming, distorting the air around it. Kyle frowned, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. "What the hell is that?" Mira approached cautiously, her scanner whirring as it tried to make sense of the readings. "It's a power source. But it's not just power in the palace. This thing could fuel an entire fleet, or destroy one." A realization struck her, cold and sharp. It's a failsafe. If the Emperor dies, they'll use this to wipe out anyone who comes for them. Kyle's expression darkened. "So we're not just assassins now. We're saboteurs." Mira nodded, already scanning the containment field for weaknesses. "We disable this, and we cripple their empire. But we'll have to move fast." Kyle sighed, muttering under his breath. "You always have to make things complicated." The sound of boots echoed in the distance, drawing closer. Mira worked quickly, her hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. Kyle stood guard, his weapon at the ready. "They're coming," he warned. "I need more time," Mira replied, her voice tense. Kyle didn't answer. He simply stepped into the doorway, ready to face whatever came. The first wave of guards surged into the chamber, and Kyle met them with ferocious precision. Plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls as he moved, his blade a blur of deadly arcs. Mira forced herself to focus, blocking out the chaos as she worked to disable the containment field. The crystalline structure pulsed violently as she bypassed its safeguards, its energy threatening to overload. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't stop. "Any day now," Kyle shouted, his voice strained. With a final command, Mira deactivated the field. The crystal shuddered, its glow fading as it lost containment. "We're done," she said, grabbing her rifle. Kyle dispatched the last guard with a brutal strike, then turned to her. "Time to go." They raced out of the chamber as the crystal's energy began to destabilize. Explosions rocked the palace, the force of the blast ripping through its foundations. Mira and Kyle emerged into the night, just as the ground beneath the palace gave way. The spires of the Gorath seat of power crumbled, consumed by fire and destruction. As they watched from a safe distance, Kyle turned to Mira. "You realize this isn't over." Mira nodded, her expression grim. "No, but it's a start." Above them, the stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. The smoke still clung to the air, thick and acrid, as Mira and Kyle made their way through the outskirts of Gorath Prime's capital. The once glimmering spires of the royal district lay in ruins, their skeletal remains jutting against the night sky like the broken ribs of a dying beast. Sirens wailed in the distance, joined by the occasional burst of plasma fire as panicked forces struggled to restore order. Mira crouched behind a jagged outcrop of debris, her chest heaving from exertion. She wiped soot from her face with a gloved hand, her thoughts racing. The mission was over, or so it seemed. The Emperor was dead, his palace obliterated, and the failsafe they'd uncovered had been dismantled. Yet instead of triumph, there was only a gnawing unease. Kyle dropped down beside her, his usually steady demeanor now crackling with restrained frustration. "We barely made it out alive," he muttered, scanning their surroundings. "And for what? A power vacuum? A rebellion we won't live to see." Mira didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the fires of the destroyed palace cast an eerie glow. "It's not about seeing the rebellion," she said finally, her voice quiet. "It's about planting the seed, making sure they can't just replace one tyrant with another." Kyle let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Seeds don't grow without water, Mira. And right now, all I see is scorched earth." She turned to face him, her expression sharper than her usual calm. "You think this was meaningless? That stopping them from unleashing a weapon like that wasn't worth the risk?" "I think we walked into this mission blind," Kyle shot back, his voice low but firm. "The intel was incomplete. That device wasn't just some failsafe. It was something bigger, something we didn't understand. And now, the Gorith know we're more than a nuisance. They'll retaliate." Mira felt the weight of his words, the truth in them cutting deeper than she cared to admit. But she couldn't afford to dwell on doubts. Not now. "Then we make sure we're ready when they do," she said. "We've hurt them, Kyle, more than they realize. They're vulnerable now, and that's our advantage." Before Kyle could reply, the faint hum of approaching ships reached their ears. Mira motioned for him to follow, and they slipped deeper into the shadows of the ruined city. They reached the extraction point just as dawn began to creep over the horizon. The transport ship was a small, nondescript freighter, its engines purring softly as it waited for them. As they boarded, Mira caught sight of the pilot, a grizzled veteran who barely acknowledged their presence before preparing for takeoff. Inside, the cabin was cramped and cold, its walls lined with the scars of countless missions. Mira and Kyle settled into their seats, neither speaking as the ship lifted off. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engines. Kyle leaned back, closing his eyes as if trying to block out the weight of what they'd just done. Mira, however, couldn't sit still. She fidgeted with the scanner on her wrist, replaying the energy signature from the device they'd destroyed. "Still can't let it go, can you?" Kyle's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Mira looked up, meeting his gaze. "You saw it too, Kyle. That device, it wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. Does it matter now? It's gone." She shook her head. "No. The device in the throne room was just a piece of it. Whatever power they were tapping into, it's still out there." Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "We're being followed." Mira and Kyle snapped into action, rushing to the cockpit. Through the viewport, they could see a sleek Gorith fighter bearing down on them, its weapon systems glowing ominously. "Can we outrun them?" Mira asked, her mind already working through alternatives. The pilot grimaced. "Not likely. We're running low on fuel, and that thing's faster than us by a mile." Kyle glanced at Mira. "Looks like we're not done yet." The fight was brutal. The freighter's defenses were minimal, and the Gorith fighter was relentless. Mira and Kyle worked together to man the ship's outdated weapon systems, their coordination honed by years of experience. Plasma bolts lit up the sky, each near miss a reminder of how close they were to being obliterated. Finally, Kyle managed to land a direct hit, the fighter spiraling out of control before exploding in a flash of light. The freighter shuddered from the shockwave, but it held together. As the smoke cleared, the pilot let out a breath of relief. "We're clear. For now." Mira slumped back into her seat, exhaustion washing over her. Kyle joined her, his expression grim. "That's the thing about pulling the lion's tail," he said. "Eventually it bites back." When they reached their rendezvous point, they were met by a small group of resistance fighters. Their leader, a young woman named Aria, greeted them with a mix of awe and apprehension. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The emperor is dead. The palace is gone. The people are already talking about rising up." Mira nodded, though her satisfaction was tempered by the lingering questions in her mind. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Gorith won't go down without a fight. You need to be ready for what's coming." Aria's expression hardened, her determination clear. "We've been ready for years. Thanks to you, we finally have a chance." As the resistance fighters led them to a makeshift command center, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was far from complete. The destruction of the device had been a blow to the Gorith, but it was also a warning. There were forces at play that they barely understood, and the cost of underestimating them could be catastrophic. Kyle seemed to sense her unease. As they prepared to part ways with the resistance, he pulled her aside. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked. Mira shook her head. "Not by a long shot." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then I guess we better get to work." As the sun set on their hidden base, Mira stood alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. The weight of the mission lingered, but so did the spark of something greater. For the first time in years, she felt something close to hope. Not for herself, but for the people they were fighting for. Kyle joined her, his presence grounding her as the night settled in. "Think we'll live to see the end of this?" he asked. Mira didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at the stars, the vast expanse of the universe stretching endlessly above them. "Maybe," she said finally, "but even if we don't, we've already made sure it won't end with them." Kyle nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "That's enough for me." They stood in silence, the weight of their journey shared between them. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. They weren't done fighting. Not yet.